Hey, welcome back to Vid Pod Quo. Well, technically this is Vid Pod Quo, and I will be reviewing the Amazing Spider-Man, the new Spider-Man reboot that just came out. Before I get into that, I want to put out on the table my feelings about the original Spider-Man trilogy. I feel like the original trilogy had some good things going for it. It was a good way to introduce people that may not be familiar with the comic books to Spider-Man's world, his family of characters, his gallery of villains, yada yada yada. My major issue with those movies, the writing, specifically the dialogue, but also the plotting of the writing, the pacing, and the tone. God in heaven, the tone of those movies is all over the place, with the exception of the third. The third is pretty much universally maligned for being a bad movie, and it ain't good. But the one thing it got right that even the first two didn't was it kept the tone throughout the movie. The third movie was goofy silly from beginning to end. It was just goofy silly. And God bless him for keeping that tone throughout it. The other ones, especially two, the one that most people prefer out of that original trilogy, to me, had the biggest pacing and the biggest tonal issues. It went back and forth from super serious to super goofy, super serious, super goofy, for no particular reason. Things happened in that movie because the plot dictated that it was supposed to happen, not because anything came organically. But that's how I feel about those. On to this one. I'll say that I was a little disappointed in that I wanted this to be like an Iron Man. I wanted this to be like a Captain America. I wanted it to be like a Dark Knight. I wanted it to be a movie that I just felt compelled to evangelize about from the rooftops and tell people, oh my God, this is an amazing superhero movie. It's one of the best ever made. It's great. It's good. It's absolutely a good movie. It's probably my favorite in the Spider-Man series. But there's some, I can't even really put my finger on it, but there's definitely some missteps that keep it, that hold it on that lower echelon for me. And it's not up there with Avengers, Iron Man, and all of those. There's definitely some stuff that they could have done a little better. Um, I'll start with what they did perfectly well, which was casting and writing and special effects. Those three alone, they nailed. The casting, top to bottom, was absolutely great. Andrew Garfield is a much better Peter Parker slash Spider-Man than Tobey Maguire ever was. Um, Emma Stone, who, if you've listened to our podcast before, you've heard me evangelize about Emma Stone and talk about how much I love her as a young actress. She turned in a wonderful performance here, very nuanced. And Martin Sheen as Uncle Ben, I mean, he's Martin fucking Sheen. What more can you say? Sally Field was disappointing only because they didn't give her a lot to do, and I guess that would be a knock on the writing, but not a knock on her as an actress. What they gave her to do, she was great. Dennis Leary, he's always good. Um, Reese Efans, I think it's Reese or Rice, I can't pronounce that name, I apologize. As Kurt Connors, he may have been the one weak link. I think if I had to say there was a weak link in the acting, it was him. Only because everyone else seemed like they were bringing their A game, and he was bringing like B plus game. You know, he's not bad. He's not overly hammy. He was written very well. He had stuff to do. It's just he just seemed a little less into it than the rest of the cast. Which, whatever, you're not gonna hit a home run with everybody, but overall, casting was great. The writing, both from a dialogue and a plotting standpoint, was great. I was a little concerned that they would make some changes to the plot and the familiar story of Spider-Man just to say, hey, we're different. Hey, we have mechanical web shooters now. We're different. We're totally different. And it's not Mary Jane. It's Gwen Stacy. It's totally different. No, all of the changes that they made, they didn't just make to differentiate themselves from the Raimi trilogy. They made them because they make sense in the context of the story now. A perfect example is Gwen Stacy. They took Gwen Stacy, and she's not this lived next door to Peter Parker his whole life. This is, this is all about being a love story. That's what the original trilogy was. It was a love story wrapped around superhero dressing, which is fine if that's what you're going for. In this, they said, no, this is not a love story. This is a story about fathers and sons, both biological fathers and surrogate fathers, and the effects that they have on the young men in their lives. And because of that, it made sense that we don't have the, oh my God, I just want her to notice me and one day we'll be in love together like we were when I was 5 years old, Mary Jane. Instead, you have, hey, you're pretty cool. Hey, you're pretty cool. We're both in high school and young. Let's date. You have Gwen Stacy for that, and that made sense. It's not to say that there isn't a love story. There's obviously a love element to it, but this is not about them being in love. That is not the point of this story. And also, there's no love triangle, which I greatly appreciated. Um, Everything that they made as a change made sense, worked within the context of this movie, and I think they were all improvements. If I had to name some negatives, I would say that, like I said, there's still just something that's missing. I think maybe it's the fact that it was both thematically and visually a pretty dark movie, and you don't usually get movies this dark with superheroes that are children. I mean, Iron Man, you'll get that. Batman, you'll get that. You don't usually get it for characters um, like Spider-Man, obviously in this case, or any of the other characters that we associate with being younger. You don't get that sort of movie with them. And this was a pretty dark movie. It's nitpicking, but the fact that he loses his mask, not even loses, he willingly takes his mask off about 7 or 8 times in this movie is ridiculous. There's almost no point in him wearing the mask, but I did like something that came of it towards the end. I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but the last conversation he has about the mask with someone, I think that's going to have an impact on him. And if they do sequels, we'll see him losing the mask less frequently because of that. So that's a plus. Um, my biggest thing about the movie, the two biggest takeaways that I had as far as me being a total and complete dork, were that the way that Spider-Man moved in this, even out of the suit, like when he was doing Spider-Man stuff, Peter Parker out of the suit and Peter Parker in the suit as Spider-Man, moved a lot more fluidly and looked much more like you would expect Spider-Man to look. I think the major difference between the way Spider-Man looked in this and the way he looked in the original trilogy is, if you look at Sam Raimi, he is a fan of the Steve Ditko, John Romita Sr. Spider-Man era, where Spider-Man was drawn a little differently. He was drawn more bulky, kind of not blocky, but he was drawn much more like a person swinging from ropes, like a gymnast almost. Whereas when you get to sort of the 80s and 90s, when you get to the McFarlanes and the Larsons and even the Bagleys, back when he was on Amazing and on Ultimate Spider-Man, they drew him more life, more like more like an insect. Like he moved in poses that seemed unnatural, and I personally, because that's what I grew up with, that's the look I prefer on my Spider-Man, and they definitely nailed that here. The other thing, because I am a total dork, is there's a mid-credit sequence, and in it there's a shot that is almost identical to a shot from one of my favorite underrated horror movies ever, The Exorcist 3. If you've seen The Exorcist 3 and then you go see Amazing Spider-Man, there is no doubt in your mind what scene I'm talking about in Exorcist 3. It is very blatant. I don't know if it was something that Mark Webb decided to do. He said, I really like Exorcist 3 and I want to put this in there, or if it was a total coincidence. Either way, there's no mistaking that it will be very reminiscent for you, and that made me geek out a little bit in the theater. Um, yeah, bottom line, it's a good comic book movie. It's not a great comic book movie. I still think it's probably the best Spider-Man movie, but I don't think it comes near any of the Marvel Studios movies. and definitely not near some of the best of the X Men movies. So it's good, but it could have been better. Could have been amazing.